of making
100%.
money. They can't stand the fact that football's not like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it brings me on to Florentino Perez. His remarks of saving football. What do you make of that? Saving football by bringing...
You can't save football by making football what it isn't. And that is, you take away the love that the fans have for it. You take away the Champions League, which we've got all these emotional connections with. You know, when you dismantle a whole league system that's been built over 150 years, longer, you can't expect there not to be a ripple effect. It's going to send shockwaves down the leagues. Smaller teams are going to struggle. The teams that aren't in the Big Six in the Premier League are the ones that are going to really struggle because only one of them can qualify for the Super League. And I think eventually it'll only ever be one team that does, because as soon as one team starts dominating that 14 teams, you'll see them enter the Super League, get a massive boost, and then eventually you might as well not have that slot because all these teams just won't be able to compete with this one team that made it. Yeah. The same way Manchester City took over a few years ago with Sheikh Mansour. As soon as someone pumps money into that league, you can't do anything about it if it's done well.
Yeah.
And so to say that one league slot to enter the Super League is going to essentially save football because it gives other teams a chance to play with the big boys.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
It's a joke.
Because it's creating the bigger division between all these clubs.
Yeah.
Like you said, this is the Premier League stance and all the domestic league stances. How are these big clubs in Italy, England and Spain going to get these riches of 500 million or like whatever it's between 500 and 3.5 billion? How are they going to get these riches, go back to their domestic league and act like they've not got a competitive advantage?
Exactly.
That is the biggest thing. And like you said, they say, oh, well, with these extra 5 slots, we'll have new entrants into the Super League that we handpick, they cherry pick these teams. And then they get the big 300 mil. They probably won't, that's the founders fund, but they get an extra boost in finance for that 1 year. Now they have an advantage when they go back to this, and you're just creating these inflated super clubs that can't even play with the rest of the football pyramid. And go for it.
Think about a West Ham team this year who no one saw even challenging for top 4. We know how badly they're run as a club. Like they're quite corrupt.
In terms of David Gold and Sullivan.
Yeah.
I mean, you say that, but it's objective.
You can take it with a pinch of salt what I just said, but
yeah.
I feel like that story would never be allowed to happen ever again. And we have the Leeds United and we have the Sheffield United who are basically up there with the big boys. And then last year Sheffield United were competing. They were 5th for most of the season.
Yeah.
And so when you have teams like this who genuinely believe they can beat the Big Six, you discount everything that football means, and that is that anybody can beat anybody.
That is, the uncertainty aspect of football.
That's the fairness of football. That's why we watch it. Yeah. Because when we turn on the TV, we were like, oh, Liverpool are playing, for example. Let's hope they lose.
Yeah.
Because they're playing Brighton. And there is a chance that, there's a very good chance that Brighton can do something.
Yeah.
Because it's the Premier League. So the best teams play. And so we have to...
Even if we extend it outside the Premier League, into playing Benevento, stuff like that, it's the same situation where if a club's efficient, ran really well, coached really well, it doesn't matter what the financial status is.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, they can argue, well, if that's the case, it doesn't matter what the financial status is. It doesn't matter if we create this massive divide. That's potentially an argument. But I just want to bring in a different sport. It's combat sport, MMA. Again, I don't know much about combat sport. We had Luke on the first episode. He's a massive combat sport fan. You know quite a bit about combat sport as well, MMA. And I just want to bring in the UFC and Bellator. I believe they're two different publishers, you could describe them as.
Yeah.
Promoters.
That
Publish the same sport, basically. And with this divide in football, you'll have the ESL, let's say they're, in this analogy, the UFC, because they're the big boys, they're the money makers, versus Bellator, who is, I know there's loads of bodies in the other side of the football world, which is UEFA, FIFA, Premier League, etc., etc. But let's say they're Bellator in this analogy. With the rise of UFC, I just want to go through the money differences. Again, completely different sports, but this is something that I wanted to bring up. In these sports, in this MMA sport, UFC, their biggest fighter, Conor McGregor, his annual wage depends on how many fights he gets, but it's around like 15 to 30 mil, depending on how much he does. To put that into context, with the top Bellator fighter and what they earned in Bellator 187 and also throughout the annual year, I think his name's Juan Archuleta. Again, I don't know shit about MMA, but he earned 150k as his overall earnings
in a year.
And just a few more numbers. 187 MMA fighters in the UFC, which is 33% of the UFC fighters, earned six-figure salaries, so in the millions. In the 100,000s. So that's a lot. Whereas in Bellator, only the top bracket of fighters earn above 100k. And I just want to bring this analogy into football. Apparently it's a 23-year contract. In this 23 years, well, what we see in MMA is the top fighters in Bellator, most of the time, are young up-and-coming fighters who eventually have the ambition to move on to the UFC.
Yeah.
Or they're retiring fighters from UFC going into Bellator.
Yeah.
That is the fabric of these two publishers. Can you explain, with what I've just said there, how in a 23-year cycle of the ESL that we could see an analogy like this in football?
What you think? You think there is a similarity between MMA fighters jumping between?
I think this dynamic that we see in MMA can be created through the 23 years of...
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're essentially saying the ESL, because that's where the big money is representative of the UFC.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean...
And the top talents in the... Let's just give the other side of football, the side that we're arguing, UEFA, FIFA. Let's just call it, just for the sake of speaking,
I mean,
proper football.
when you look at it like that,
yeah.
What has the biggest pull, the UFC or Bellator? UFC. Who brings the most money in because of that? The UFC.
Yeah.
Like through pay-per-views, through just having generally more fans buying merch, etc. So if you know you have the best fighters and you know you have the best teams in the UFC, they're essentially going to be the ones that pull all the money in.
Yeah.
And so for Bellator, it becomes very difficult to ever match the UFC in terms of paying the fighters enough to make them want to fight, and then also having the fans that will back them.
The pull.
Yeah. And so you have this massive powerhouse, and you have what will eventually be the Champions League. You have the ESL, who are the UFC, and you have the Champions League, the Europa League, everything represented by UEFA.
Let's call it the football pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As Bellator.
Yeah.
The ones who will just always look up to them because they have the biggest teams and they don't. And therefore they have the biggest pull and they don't. And therefore they get the most money.
And I've seen some, it's typically younger fans that say, oh no, the ESL looks great. You know, UEFA corrupt, get them out.
Well,
That analogy,
what company isn't corrupt?
we'll move on to that in a moment.
Right.
About the corruption aspect. This analogy shows that a massive money-making machine that is UFC, that is the ESL, directly pulls money away from Bellator, or in this case, the football pyramid.
Yeah.
We've demonstrated how they're interlinked, and promoting one effectively diminishes the other. And in 23 years' time, if this contract goes through, the big players in the football pyramid, the aspiration is going to be, I need to move to the ESL clubs. And then imagine in 100 years' time now, where massive clubs that aren't involved, Napoli, Everton, who else? Sevilla, massive Ajax, Benfica, all their biggest talents are just going to go to this ESL, this money-making machine. And they're going to be the divide between the two, the football pyramid and the ESL is just going to be infinitely huge. It's just going to be massive, and it's just going to keep growing.
And also, when you have, for example, you have a Paul Pogba in a Premier League, that doesn't just draw Man United fans to watch him. That draws other football fans to watch him, maybe even opposing teams to watch those matches. And so you take that player out of that league, for example, you not only destroy that club because they can no longer compete and have the same pull as the Super League teams, you also destroy the revenues that come in from other third parties, like, for example, French fans who just want to watch Pogba play in the Prem.
Yeah.
And so...
even third parties like Pepsi who sponsor...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you destroy the pyramid because you take an individual player that not only plays for one team but represents a league. When you think of a league, you think of certain individuals and you tune into that league to watch Ronaldo when he joined the Serie A. You tune in to watch Ronaldo.
Exactly.
So it has a ripple effect that will destroy smaller teams.
Yeah, it's seismic. It's this ripple effect as well.